I'm going to start now. Thanks everyone for joining us for this session, which is we're going to try to have as much as we can a virtual roundtable discussion. I'm Laura Hammond. I'm the Gcrf challenge leader for conflict and displacement, together with my colleague Neelam Raina, who's not able to join us today, but we have most of the other global challenge leader from the different challenge areas, which we'll explain in a few minutes here today. We just wanted to, we thought that this would be a great opportunity at the conference to try to reach out to the wider development studies community to speak about some of the work that the Global Challenges Research Fund has been involved in over the last 5 years, and to fill people in a bit on where we plan to be going in this kind of bridging period that we're in, and then beyond into what we hope will be a kind of GCRF 2. So the way that we thought this session should work is, as I said, I'm joined by several of our challenge leaders. We'll hear from Helen Fletcher, who's the Director of International Programs at UKRI for GCRF and the Newton Fund, first, who will give us a kind of overview of how GCRF, what we've been up to, what the fund has been up to, and what's happening right now. People will have seen today's announcement probably that the Foreign Office and DFID are merging. Not entirely sure how that might affect us. DFID's not our main kind of government department partner, but we do a lot with DFID. So as much as if people have questions about that, we can try to discuss them. But as you'll appreciate that it's very much unfolding news, and so we're all trying to figure out what that means. But more directly relevant to these discussions, Helen will give an overview of kind of where the fund is. We'll open that up for some general discussions around GCRF more broadly. And then we'd want to move into hearing from each of the challenge leaders about what's happening within each of their 6 portfolio areas. So we have Helen Lambert, who is the challenge leader for health, Mark Pelling, who is a challenge leader for resilience, Tarat Shahid and Nicola Lowe, who are both challenge leaders on food systems, Kelsey Shanks for education, Jaideep Gupta, who's co-organizing this session with me, who is this challenge leader for cities, and then I'll talk to you about my own portfolio on conflict and displacement. Just to give an overview of the GCRF for people who may not be familiar with it, it was established 5 years ago in 2015 as it was supposed to be a 5-year, £1.5 billion fund to promote interdisciplinary and cutting-edge research on key development challenges. Over that time, it's funded more than 1,200 projects, and that includes 12 large research hubs, which many of you may be involved with or know about, which look at key development challenges, but it also includes networks, large and small research grants, and other initiatives. So now we are coming to the end of this 5-year funding cycle, and we're taking stock of where we are, what have been the successes and challenges that we've encountered, and where we should be going over the next year and beyond. Helen will be discussing that in more detail. But I thought at the outset it would be helpful to just set a kind of an agenda for today's roundtable, because we really don't want it to be just a kind of one-way releasing of information. We want it to be, as much as possible, a discussion. So we would like to have this kind of overview and then some discussion back from you, and then hearing from the different challenge areas, and then also, again, having some time for discussion. If you are a GCRF grant holder, if you are thinking of applying for funding, if you have not applied because you would never apply and you object to the whole idea of it, whatever were your position, we'd love to hear from you about your perspectives about GCRF. To think about also what kinds of areas, themes, what kind of modes of funding, kind of ways of working should we be thinking about as we're gearing up to try to think about a kind of next large, what we might call a GCRF 2. So if I could now ask Helen to give us this brief overview, then we'll carry on. And so I hope that there'll be a couple of different times for there to be opportunities for discussion, and that as much as possible we can have people either speaking straight from the floor, or if you're more comfortable with that, writing your question in the chat boxes. And then our assistant Michael here and Jaideep and I will try to curate and respond to as many of those questions as we can. So now I have to find Helen Fletcher's little face in amongst all these other faces. Bear with me for a second while I can try to do that. There she is. And hope to hopefully bring her up to I'm bringing you to the podium now, Helen. So it's all here. Here you are. There.
And thanks very much, Laura, for that introduction and for the opportunity to talk to you today. And as Laura said, it would really be fantastic to actually have your engagement and thoughts on where we're going. And Laura and Jaideep have given me a difficult task because we're in a very fluid situation at the moment. Obviously, our fund is governed by spending reviews, government spending reviews, and was established in 2015. We had 5 years of funding. So the current Gcrf 1, if you like, is due to finish in April 2021. And we have been thinking over the last 18 months, 2 years really, about what a Gcrf 2 might look like. And of course, as spending reviews get pushed back, as COVID-19 has an impact globally, as FCO and DFID merge, this may well change, but I'm going to share with you at least some of our thinking as it stands today. And I think some of this thinking is still relevant, even in the sort of current global context. So from certainly September last year, the way that we were thinking is reflecting on Gcrf 1 and looking forward, we felt that the fund should continue to evolve and continue to learn, but retain a focus on global risks that threaten sustainable development and peace and prosperity globally. And we've always worked to 4 core principles within Gcrf, and those are working in partnership and equitable partnerships with developing countries, with researchers in low and middle income countries, with research organisations, and with government and non-government agencies. And so we think that working in partnership has been of real value in Gcrf 1, one of the strengths, and we would like to continue that going forward. The other focus we have, which is a bit more controversial, is delivering excellent interdisciplinary research and innovation. And the concept of excellent research is something that's been thrown up as a criticism. How can you do development and do excellent research? And my answer to that is that we cannot do development unless the research that we're doing is excellent. And just because we're doing development, we cannot in any way compromise the integrity of the research that we are conducting. So that research has to be ethical, the research questions have to be meaningful and impactful, and the research has to be robust. And so that is what we mean by research excellence. And I don't see that has to be in any way compromised or should be in any way compromised just because the primary aim of what you're doing is development. So I think partnership and excellent research in the way that we define excellence should be kept going forward. The other important element of Gcrf we would like to keep is the capacity building element, recognizing that, we want equitable partnership with our academic partners in low and middle income countries. But how can we have equitable partnerships when there are 100 PhDs for every one in Africa, also parts of Asia or other countries that we're working with? How can we have equitable partnerships when there isn't the infrastructure there, physical infrastructure, but also infrastructure in terms of research systems, support from your institutes, and so on? So I think, if we truly aspire to work equitably, we have to look at building those full research systems as well, to enable that equity to happen. The final focus, of course, is on maximising impact. So we felt in Gcrf 1 and will propose for Gcrf 2 that's an integral to what we do, and we want to perform research which has meaningful impact. And so we will be asking our researchers from the very beginning of their proposals, and when we're talking to you as challenge leaders and academics and scoping out ideas, to really help us identify, you know, what are the places where research can have benefit. And not all development questions can be answered by research, but what are the ones that can be best answered, and how can we do that, and then how can that be built into a proposal from the outset? How can that be built into the research call from the outset, to maximise that ability? You can be a fantastic researcher, but you also need the skills of how to translate that research into impact. And so that might be policy impact, for example. So how do you meaningfully engage with policymakers, and how you build in from the beginning? So yeah, so those remain the core elements for a Gcrf 2, and certainly if we look at some of the themes across the councils for Gcrf 2, then although we were discussing these a year ago, I think many of them remain relevant today. So emergencies and epidemics, climate change. I think, you know, these are things which will remain priorities for the Gcrf. Sustainable food production, agriculture, global health, One Health, education, conflict. So the strengths that we've built in Gcrf 1, we would like to continue in Gcrf 2 as well, and perhaps with more of that emphasis on climate change more explicitly, and doing more in terms of capacity building as well, and working sort of across government to really identify, you know, where are the gaps in capacity building, where can UKRI and the Gcrf best contribute to that. Yeah, I mean, and you know, and as I said, you know, these are changing times and difficult times, and we will to some extent have to now work with the new government structures to, and I think probably work more closely with other government departments, and more effectively to sort of deliver really what UKRI and can best do, you know, recognising where our strengths are, as well as where other departments may be best placed. So Laura, I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll pause there and hand back to you.
Okay. Great, thank you so much, Helen. I'm going to, I guess what we should do now is take any, if there are general questions around the Gcrf, what we've been doing now, what we're thinking about, what you think we should be thinking about, this would be a great time to have some discussion around that before we get into discussing some of the specific challenge areas. So do people have specific questions that they want to raise? Either you can raise your hand, and which we can call on you there, or you can type your questions into the chat, which we can also see at the same time. If you raise your hand, I can enable an open podium and people can just ask questions themselves. We have first just a comment, I think more than anything else, from Andrea Rigon, saying what a timely discussion given today's news about DFIDs merging within or with the FCO. As I said in the introductory remarks, our kind of key government ministry that manages all of UKRI funds is actually BEIS, which is the, I always get it wrong, Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy ministry. So we're not affected in that way, although we obviously do lots and lots of work together with DFID and collaborate with them strongly. So we're watching that space very closely. Anyone want to raise a question, start off with a question? It would be great to hear from people who may have perspectives of their own, having been recipients of Gcrf funding, how things have gone, or anything that you wish would have been different. if there is, I'm going to leave the open podium so people can speak if they want to. Oops. Tahrad, is that you, Tahrad? Tahrad Shahid is one of our challenge leaders, but she's having difficulty with her connection. Could I ask, I think on this call, there should be, if anyone who is already a GCRF recipient, does anyone want to say something about the work that they're doing with GCRF funding? Now I'm not sure whether people can actually speak. Okay, Helen's just written a comment that we need to recognize that GNI's contracted this year and that the aid budget will be impacted. So that may be a useful starting point. Obviously, we're not able to meet here in person, of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is also having a major impact on almost all of our research activities. Not being able to travel, not being able for people to conduct field work, but also when we think about the fund itself, and the amount of money that's available, the funding that goes into GCRF is part of the 0.7% overseas development aid commitment. And as we heard today at lunchtime, the Prime Minister insisted that 0.7 was going to remain as it is. But we also know that 0.7 is a movable target. So when GNI is contracting this year, it means that in all likelihood, well, for sure, the overall development portfolio will shrink correspondingly, and so the research budget can also be expected to shrink somewhat. Helen, did you want to say anything more about that? Helen, are you there? There she is. Yes. Do you want to say anything more about how that influences our thinking about funding over the coming year?
Yeah, sure. And, it is an important consideration. So the ODA budget is linked to gross national income. So the UK commit 0.7% of gross national income to ODA. So we're expecting a 15%, up to 15% contraction in budgets. So that translates to about a £3 billion impact on the aid budget. Obviously, DFID are the largest spender of aid in the UK, but outside of DFID, then BEIS is the next biggest spender, and a large portion of that goes on GCRF and Newton. So that means that we do have to look for, we will have to, potentially look for cost savings in our budgets this year, and it will constrain activities. So, we are used to, as researchers, having a regular program of research calls in the areas that we work on. And we have sort of worked very hard, I think, over the last few years to talk to you as academics and to consult more broadly on what the priority areas are and where we should be developing calls and what we should be funding. And, from our perspective, those activities are going to have to slow down and be paused. So they're not going to be cancelled. We are expecting a recovery in the economy, in the next year or 2 years or 3 years. But it does mean that the scale of activity that we had planned to be launching, thinking of this GCRF2 and this new programme of research, will be different. It will have to be smaller. And so I put a comment in the chat there, we're going to have to prioritise. And what should those priorities be? Looking at the research questions that the themes that we focus on. Should we prioritize themes? Should we prioritize funding particular countries? Should we be focusing on capacity building or research or impact translation? And it would really help us to have a view from the community, you know, our community who would be accessing our funding and helping us to develop these ideas on, you know, what the priority should be, you know, given that we're going to have to pause and slow things down, what needs to be protected going forward for the next couple of years to sort of enable impact and put us in a position to then, you know, really do the best that we can in constrained circumstances. So yeah, so please do, you know, put your hand up or share comments in chat or talk to us afterwards, because, you know, we do want that.
Right.
And there's
Helen,
another question.
Yeah, there's two questions that maybe while you're on the podium you could answer now. Which one is just a quick one about how long the Gcrf Newton urgent call for COVID is likely to remain open, and the second was about the ICAI reports on Newton and Gcrf and whether that's likely to affect how we're working. And then we'll go to some of the raised hands that are waiting.
Yeah, so both good questions. So the Gcrf Newton Agile call is likely to remain open until at least August, September. And I think we have to review the demand from the community, the budgets that we have, the strategic need and the gaps. You know, are other funders funding a lot of research in this space? Is it needed anymore? So we will have to continue monitoring it, but I should imagine that we would be open until at least late summer, autumn, and you know, as soon as we do get to the point where we recognize we need to be moving to closure, we'll be sure to give the community you know, plenty of advance notice that is happening, so that you can get applications in if you're planning them. But yes, I mean, but it is an agile call. It is looking to spend over the next 12 to 18 months, so there ultimately will have to be, you know, there will have to be a stop date, but we're going to keep it open for as long as we can. And then on the the ICAI reviews for Newton and Gcrf, how does this change the way that Gcrf is administered? Actually, it has a huge impact. And you know, the Newton Fund was launched a year before the Gcrf, and we learnt a huge amount from the Newton Fund that we translated across to Gcrf. And the reviews that Newton Fund has gone through, we've immediately translated that learning to Gcrf. I mean, the funds are administered by the same team in our government department, BAYS. The team at UKRI administer both funds together. So they do cross talk, and they learn and they share. I think, you know, the funds are fundamentally different in that the Newton is aimed at middle income countries, and it's matched funding, so the partner country puts money in as well, whereas Gcrf is bottom-up researcher driven. So there are some fundamental differences in the funds, but we, you know, where we can learn, we do share that across. And yeah, and there's another question there from Mark Pelling. Can I comment on how LMIC as well as UK research voices are heard in prioritisation? Yeah, you know, absolutely. I mean, it's really, I mean, you know, equitable partnership is one of the key principles of Gcrf, and we have worked to engage communities. One of the, I suppose, the easiest thing to point to is our peer review college. So we have representatives from more than 72 different countries globally, 95% low and middle income, across the broad range of academic areas that we fund, with around 300 researchers. And so those researchers actively contribute and shape the Gcrf. And, you know, we have reached out to them, they've shaped calls, they've actually helped shape government policy. They've, you know, through collaboration with DFID on climate change, for example, they work with us to examine your grant proposals and their own grant proposals, which are submitted. So we very much need to include those voices in prioritization as well. And certainly, that's one of the things that challenge leaders are tasked with, is to actively reach out and engage those communities.
Great. Andrea Rigon, have you been waiting for a little while? Do you want to ask a question now? I think if you just join the podium, you should be able to speak. Possibly.
I think maybe I need to leave.
Yeah, so maybe why don't you go off? That's right. And then go ahead, Andrea, go ahead. There you are. Nice. Go ahead.
And just to say very shortly that the calls that have been coming out in the last few years from the Grand Challenge Research Fund were amazing. Finally, you read calls that make sense for, as a development researcher, for both development and research, very well thought through. So it was really fantastic. And in many cases, and so my reflection a little bit would be a bit on the political economy of the Grand Challenge Research Fund. For example, for my department has been a bonanza. We almost doubled, and our fear is almost that there will be like a contraction, and you have brought in all these researchers from all over the world, and you will have to suddenly fire them. You have expanded your facilities, your space, and how long can we sustain that? So that's a question. And on the other side, also the political economy of what happened to researchers in the global south. And for me, it's fantastic to see how partnership was at the center of the Grand Challenge Research Fund. But in the end, I've seen and heard a lot from colleagues about PIs in the UK approaching them with their own research agenda and saying, do you want to be on this bid? It will give you $500 a day on top of your salary for a lot of your time. And a lot of my friends and colleagues, they said, of course, but doing that, they've left the very important jobs that they had in their own university in sub-Saharan Africa to train the next generation of people or to advise the government. Why should I advise the government or do research that is important for my own government when a PI in the UK is offering me basically enough money in a year and a half to pay for my children education in the UK or in the States? And so I think it has created really sort of a competition for the best researchers that we have moved out of their very essential job. And I really seen this on the faces, on the dilemma of many researchers who have basically kind of, neglected local priorities because of us. So I think there is a lot of responsibility that comes as UK PIs with the power of the money of the Grand Challenge Research Funds, and the quite high success rate because it was a big injection of money. And on the other side, whether there is something in terms of the mechanism that we can put in place in a way that this is a slightly bit different. And for example, if I understood well about the recent urgent calls on COVID-19, also certain institutions in the global south could lead bids. And I think that's already a great step forward. But I wonder really whether collectively and also, as a sort of institution, we can think a little bit more about that. Who has the power to initiate the research and to lead the research agenda? Thank you.
Sure. Okay, if I can respond to some of those, I can respond a little bit, and then maybe if any of the other challenge leaders want to respond as well, that would be really helpful. Just to say, it's great that you find that the calls speak to you directly. I think that question of sort of how long will it last is a great one. We would all love to know. I mean, one of the good things about it, though, is that at least if you get a GCRF for a 5-year period, that's not a short period of time in this world, in the funding world. So, 5 years, hopefully we can build something. But I think personally, I think that having worked now with the GCRF for the last 2 years, it feels like what we're trying to do within the fund itself and even within UKRI is to change the way that interdisciplinary research is thought about and the way that collaborative research, international research is thought about. So that hopefully, if tomorrow GCRF would be finished or after five more years it would be finished, that the way that development research is carried out has been transformed. That's the objective. That it should be, not that, the engineer calls the anthropologist the day before they submit their application and says, we need an anthropologist to do an impact evaluation of our intervention. It should be a relationship that starts early at the beginning of the process, that is organic and meaningful throughout the whole process of the lifetime of the project. It should not be about, as the example you gave of researchers being plucked from the countries that they've grown up in, that they come from, to work here. It should be about resources being pushed out the door and spent in the countries that we're working in. And that is, I think last year at the DSA meeting, we had a similar kind of discussion around UKRI funds, both Newton and Gcrf, and I made the point that it's a sort of like a big battleship. UKRI is. It's a kind of the place we want to get is where, as much as possible, research money is being spent in DAC countries. That's what development aid should be for. But in order to be able to do that, it takes more than just political commitment. It also takes a whole funding mechanism, a whole administrative mechanism to be able to do the due diligence to make sure that those kinds of things can happen, that grants can be kind of managed in that way. And so we're learning slowly and we're moving slowly. And as you point out with this recent rapid call, even with the rapid call, it is possible for for organizations based outside the UK to receive funds, but but they have to have received it in the past. It's a kind of, it's because of the rapid nature of it that there's not as much kind of opening as we might like to see. But I think it's all part of a process. So that's a very long answer to the question, which is to say that hopefully what's being put in place is not just how do we spend this pot of money, but actually how does it transform the ways in which we think about development research more broadly, not just with this fund, but with others as well. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in and add anything. The podium is open for other challenge leaders to say something if they want. And if not, if you want to move on from that point, also, was hoping that Jamie Cross was in the audience. I think that he was at some point. And we'd asked Jamie if he might say something a little bit about his own experience of being a Gcrf fundee. Are you there, Jamie? Perfect. Yeah, we see you.
I'm Jamie Cross, a social anthropologist based at the University of Edinburgh. And I've been involved in a number of Gcrf funded projects, both under the ESRC, AHRC, and through the collective call. I think I'd certainly second Laura's points about if anything is to be taken from this tranche of funding going forward, it's certainly the opportunity to craft a new kind of mode of interdisciplinary work that moves a little bit beyond what was kind of normal practice around development research previous to this kind of opportunity. And I think that's certainly been true at the University of Edinburgh, where the kinds of projects that have been funded have really pushed people out of their comfort zone and created opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration and partnerships with unexpected groups. So there's something very positive there. I think, like other institutions, Edinburgh has also been very successful at bringing in awards under the Gcrf, and that spans everything from the arts to the kind of physical sciences, so really across the board. I suppose a couple of key standout points from Edinburgh and from my experience, and I speak both as a Gcrf kind of PI, but also as currently an associate dean for knowledge exchange and impact at the university, where I've been responsible for helping to translate research outcomes into impact case studies. So there's obviously been quite a big uptake or kind of translation of Gcrf funded research into the REF impact case studies, which helps, I think, to establish some of the rationale for this kind of funding and helps to demonstrate just how important they are for establishing the broader public impact of this kind of funding and why that's important. So just to say a couple of words about the calls that I've been involved in, both under the HRC, ESRC's forced displacement call, and now more recently under the off-grid cities call. I've been involved in putting together international consortia that involve both academic partners and non-academic organizations. And I think in both cases, the success of the programs have been that they tap directly into current activities and areas of interest that are very much at the foreground of work around the SDGs and speak directly to current priorities. So the first project was concerned with energy access in humanitarian contexts, and was a project that's linked up directly with Chatham House and a DFID-funded Moving Energy Initiative, to that, and which at that point filled a gap in the evidence base that those organizations hadn't been able to fill themselves. The second, more recent project, which explores access to cooling in context of extreme heat across 4 different cities in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, also is designed to fill a gap in evidence that organizations operating in this space don't necessarily have the capacity to collect themselves. I suppose for me, that's one of the key lessons from some of this funding, is that it really does create an opportunity for researchers to add new kinds of evidence into debates which existing practitioners and international organizations don't already have the capacity to build themselves. I'd be happy to speak a little bit more about that, or about the projects I've been involved in, but just a few brief thoughts from my side.
Great. Thank you. If there, I don't think there are any other questions at the moment, but I thought we would do now is hear from each of the challenge leaders really quickly about what's going on in their portfolio. And I've asked them to speak for 2, not more than 3 minutes, and I will cut them off if they go over that, so that we can have some time for specific questions or discussions around those key areas. When I introduced them, the challenge leaders earlier on, I mentioned the challenge areas that they work in, but just to repeat the 6 areas. So there's conflict and forced migration, which myself and Neelam Raina, who actually is on this in this meeting, are challenge leaders for. Challenge area for cities, which Jaideep Gupta is leading. On food systems with Tahrat Shahid and Nicola Lowe. Health, Helen Lambert is leading. Education, Kelsey Shanks is leading, and resilience, Mark Pelling is leading. So I thought, Helen Lambert, would you mind taking the floor and giving us a couple of minutes on what's happening in the health portfolio? Or should we come back to you, maybe? Mark Pelling, I think you've been there. I've seen your question, so do you want to go ahead? Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, how fantastic. Yes, so I'm responsible for the resilience portfolio that talks to primarily natural hazard, but also technological hazard, vulnerability, resilience, but also the climate change crosscut, which talks to resilience and mitigation, adaptation. All of that aligned to the 2030 agenda, so a confluence of leaving no one behind, but also building back better. Just a quick highlight in the way that research has, I think, been influenced by Gcrf. Certainly we're seeing more applications that are very comfortably bringing together the vulnerability, social and physical, with the hazards work. So interdisciplinarity is working well. There's less work which explicitly approaches knowledge production than I would perhaps expect to have seen as a topic of research, and the emergent political technological spaces that come from these new forms of hybrid knowledge that are being produced at the interface of vulnerability, resilience, and hazard. There's been a number of calls. I won't go over them. There is actually one live call, Climate Resilient Networks. And next Tuesday, there'll be a public announcement for a knowledge manager for that program, which is open to low and middle income country PIs. That's a 39-month post starting in January 2021, with money for a buyout and some other activities, essentially to bring some leadership to a portfolio of projects. That's a collaboration with DFID. Other than that, looking forward and taking Helen's points into account, of course, around uncertainty and funding and the politics of our work, there are some conversations, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to bring these to the research community over the next few months. One is around nature-based solutions and inclusive resilience. Another is around synergies between low carbon development and pro-poor development. And a final area of discussion is trying to fill a gap that seems to exist in funding around the political economy of international regulation of economic practice. So the transformative macroeconomics of policy for climate change, but now inflected also through COVID-19. So I'll leave it there, Laura, but happy to answer questions after this meeting or by email. My email, I guess, is available through the Gcrf website. Thanks.
Great, thanks. We're going to come back to questions more broadly for challenge leaders after everyone's made their presentations. Helen Lambert, are you still, if you're still able to, if you can try to join the podium again? She was having difficulty joining before. Okay, we will move on and hopefully sort out whatever the technical difficulty is for Helen to get on. If Michael, our volunteer, can help her to get on the podium, that would be helpful. But let's move on and hear from Nicola Lowe, who is a food systems challenge leader.
Yes, food systems. I'll say a few words about the portfolio and how it looks at the moment, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Tarak to say a little bit about the future. So first of all, what is the food systems portfolio? Well, it covers everything to do with food production and consumption, from agriculture, livestock, aquaculture, through to food processing, which might also include biofortification and fortification, through to food distribution to the market, marketing, the food environment, through to consumption and health and nutrition. So it's the full circle really of food production and consumption, but also it encompasses areas of reduction of food waste and food spoilage and food loss at all parts of that food chain. So it's a very broad portfolio. We have in it around 300 projects. It's difficult to put an accurate number on it because a lot of the projects overlap into other portfolios, particularly the health portfolio. There's, as you can imagine, there's an interaction there, and also in climate as well. So yeah, so it's a large portfolio. Investment of around £350 million to date. So far, in terms of that food system, a lot of that investment has gone into food production and also into health, wellbeing and nutrition. Those are the two areas where we've invested most in terms of the research projects that have come forward. There's been a little bit on food waste as well, but yeah, a small amount on that and food processing. But yeah, the vast majority has gone into food production so far. So that's kind of where we've come from. Clearly, within the food systems portfolio, there are links to many of the SDGs, but I guess primarily to zero hunger, to good health and well-being, to clean water and sanitation, to life on land and climate. Those are where most of the ways in which the projects touch onto the SDGs. So I think that kind of gives a flavour of where the research investment has gone so far. And I'll just hand over to Tarak now, if she can come to the podium to talk through where we're heading in the future and where the future direction might lie. So I shall leave, and hopefully Tarak will join.
Tarak was having technical difficulties connecting. I'm not sure if she can currently hear us. Can I ask, Nikki, if you could just continue then, because I'm not sure we're going to get to hear from Tarak with her connection problem.
There's not a whole lot I can add to this because Tarot's done most of the work on liaising with different partners into developing the way forward. I think we're, as I'm sure Helen mentioned at the very beginning, we're somewhat on hold as to know where the future lies. So I think I'll leave it there. I can see that Helen Lambert has joined, so I shall hand over to Helen.
Okay, we should say if there are questions around food systems that later on, Tarat is on the call, but I think she can only text in rather than be seen. So maybe she can answer in the text chat. We now have Helen Lambert with us, who is our challenge leader for health. Thank you. So Helen, do you want to tell us something about what's going on in the health space?
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. And sorry, I didn't mean to kind of, whatever it's called, Zoom bomb the meeting. So it's the health portfolio is, I think, probably the biggest of all the challenge areas. We've currently got, I think it's 378 awards running, and then 11 new ones added to that under our recent health and context call. And then obviously in due course, we are going to be adding an additional range of projects which get funded under the current rapid calls for COVID-19. So that being the Gcrf Newton Agile Response one, which is primarily focused more on non-health impacts of the pandemic in lower and middle income countries. And then there's the global effort on COVID-19 call, which is primarily focused on health impacts, and that's jointly with the Department of Health and Social Care. As Helen's already said, broadly in relation to the global challenges, the whole portfolio is highly interdisciplinary and cross-cutting, although I think there are probably the largest number of intersections are with the food systems portfolio that you've just heard about. There are obvious overlaps through nutrition and other aspects of health and food, and also with education, as well as to some extent resilience. And we cover the whole range of forms of research and stages of research, from kind of basic medical science through to capacity building initiatives, implementation science, and of course the whole range of methodologies. And there is an emphasis on equitable partnership. And I did just want to say, in relation to one of the issues that was raised in the chat and discussed, that in addition to the current COVID-19 calls, the Medical Research Council has, through Gcrf funding, established a new panel, which will be an ongoing funding source for applied global health research. And that is innovative insofar as it's, again, highly cross-disciplinary and has a panel from all over the world and from a whole array of disciplines. But importantly, in terms of that issue that was raised, PIs can be from anywhere, and they don't even have to have a UK co-investigator. So that, I think, is a significant step towards making sure these resources go to the places and are set in terms of the priorities of the countries from which researchers are applying. And we broadly fund health areas as framed by the SDG 3 goals, so ranging from maternal, newborn and child health through non-communicable diseases, including mental health and environmental health, through the big three infectious diseases, TB, malaria, HIV, but also covering a range of health systems and funding initiatives. And in terms of what is happening at the moment, for obvious reasons, I have been working very heavily on the pandemic and COVID-19 research and being involved in getting those calls launched and ready to go. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Helen. Kelsey Shanks who is our education challenge leader. Kelsey, are you able to join the podium? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So yeah, I'm responsible for the education portfolio, and education under GCRF is very broadly defined. We include interventions from across the education time, from early childhood through to adult education, and also within a variety of contexts, so from community learning to technical and vocational training as well. But the education portfolio is slightly different from its thematic counterparts in that it's much smaller than the others. When we began our roles 2 years ago, there hadn't been any targeted education calls from GCRF. So unlike the other challenge leaders, I didn't really have a portfolio to manage. We had about 20 projects, which you can see in comparison to health, which now has 378, I think Helen just said. We were tiny. And most of those projects actually were led by a different disciplinary focus with an element of education within it. So the projects were sitting primarily in a different challenge area, and I was sort of including them. And that's not really surprising because education by its nature is very multidisciplinary. And it will have a role in all the different portfolios. But the problem is that sometimes the education findings from that research are masked by and obscured by different priorities. So in the last couple of years, it's been required to really build an education portfolio. So it's quite easy to say where our main funding lies because it kind of focuses around the 3 different thematic calls we put out through the collective programme. We had 6 different calls across ESRC, British Academy and AHRC, and we funded an additional 36 projects, I think, across different education spectrums. The 3 thematic sort of focuses we had for those calls were early childhood education, education in conflict and crisis, so emergency type education, and education that drives sustainable development. Moving forward, I would imagine we'll try to expand around these themes, but also it's hard to imagine that COVID-19 won't impact the education research agenda. I think almost 90% of the world's countries shut their schools over the last few months to enforce social distancing and slow the transmission of the virus. At least 68% of the world's student population has been affected, according to UNESCO, with 1.19 billion learners out of school across and the loss of education doesn't only diminish learning outcomes in the short term and long term, but it also increases the high likelihood of dropout rates. It reduces social economic opportunities in the future, and has far-reaching consequences for many other services that schools provide, like protection facilities, referrals for exploitation, food provision and nutrition from free school meals. So the closure of schools will obviously widen existing inequalities, and that's something I can imagine will be quite highly on our focus if we move forward. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kelsey. Jaideep, are you able to join?
I am. Can you hear me, Laura?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Laura, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm in charge of the Cities and Sustainable Infrastructure portfolio, which I suppose is one of the mid-sized portfolios, around 150 projects, and in the broadest sense, it speaks to SDG 11. But importantly, there are significant overlaps with SDG 9 around infrastructure. And so, the way this portfolio has positioned itself is to really understand that the built environment implies winners and losers, and that there's a complex relationship between the political, social, economic, cultural sort of relationships that mediate the materiality of the city. So speaking around engineering aspects, the technical aspects, but indeed, there are sort of more explicit social, cultural, economic relationships that drive other processes that aren't described explicitly in those material terms. And so, while the portfolio recognizes the very central role, for example, that engineers play in the production, the contestation, even the mediation of the built environment, the portfolio itself is wider, reaching out to a number of perspectives on the urban, but indeed reaches out to manage landscapes and the operationalized landscapes that cities are connected to through the link around human infrastructure interactions. And so overall, there's a few sort of looking at the portfolio in hindsight, almost you could say that there's a few key questions that link across projects and have guided research and engaged impact. And those are primarily to understand who the most marginalized are in the context of cities and in relation to human infrastructure interactions, but also how we understand those everyday interactions with infrastructure. And indeed, the current pandemic situation is deeply shaped by these understandings, and not just of our present vulnerabilities, but what we do in the medium and long term in order to build the sorts of resilience that we've been talking about, and I suppose reposition them in the context of this pandemic. And so the question around who or how we measure who is thriving or simply surviving or indeed failing in cities, and in relation to those human infrastructural interactions has been quite an important question running across projects in this portfolio. And lastly, I've recognized that several projects are explicitly focused on the actions, actors, and technologies that should be prioritized in order to reduce the sorts of infrastructural exclusions that have occurred. To give a sense of where we are at in terms of pipeline projects or recently commissioned studies, and recently granted projects. Many of you would have heard of the Rethinking the Off-Grid City program that funds about 11 projects, and as well as Sustainable Energy Moving Beyond Technologies. There's also sort of complementary programs with the British Academy is leading on behalf of the academies that has looked at cities and infrastructure, but also currently infrastructures of well-being in that program. There are a few GCRF hubs that speak to the portfolio in these cross-cutting sense, including the Tomorrow Cities Hub, the Arise Hub, the One Poultry Hub, several GROW projects, growing research capacities programs, as well as smaller innovations. There was recently a Frontiers of Engineering symposia that brought together engineers with social scientists that was supported by the portfolio, as well as sort of a connect with the Africa Research Universities Alliance around habitable cities. And so just to give a glance into where we're positioning next steps, these include looking explicitly at complex systems in these cross-cutting ways and in relation to the built environment. And so sort of couching these conversations in terms of the built environment speaks to the complex systems in ways that we imagined impact both large and local scale to occur. And focus on areas where predicted urban growth and urban change will have the greatest impact. And here again, the built environment framing plays a very critical role in understanding where this change is set to happen. And of course, the focus around interdisciplinarity continues to be really quite key. For instance, in linking issues around risk and insurance with informal urban spaces. And so we're hoping that these issues that have been surfaced through this take around complex systems with a variety of entry points. Again, as I said, not only at the city level, some have entered these discussions at the much smaller neighborhood level. And indeed, some take a sort of a connected systems view across cities or across regions to understand infrastructural implications. So that's a quick take on what the portfolio looks like at the moment and where we hope to be heading. Laura, I think I need to stop my broadcast actually to pass on to the next speaker.
Great. And last but not least, I would say that because it's our challenge area, Neelam Rana and I share the conflict and displacement portfolio, which Neelam handles a lot of the conflict work and I do a lot of the displacement work. So Neelam is going to talk about the stuff that she's been doing, and I'll say something briefly about mine at the very end. Neelam, can you join the podium?
Hi, I can see myself. Can you see me?
Yes, yes, we can. Nice.
So I'm Lambert. I lead the conflict and security aspect of it. The portfolio is kind of quite wide in its understanding. It depends on how tiny you want to tweak it. So we cover everything from violence, which includes urban violence, violence as understood in a nuanced fashion, but also violence within domestic spaces, which with COVID-19 we have seen a complete breaking through the roof of stats coming through. We also look at transnational organized crime. We look at C5 violations, violent extremism. We cover the entire fragility landscape that includes everything that intersects conflict with as a context within which other challenges are present, or looking at how other challenges which you heard about now are exacerbated by the presence of instability or fragility or conflict, and how the two make it almost intractable and unresolvable and a wicked problem, as we like to call it. We also include within this portfolio work around women, peace and security and gender, and the security gender lens that is applied to understand conflict very often. In the past, we have, through the collective program, funded, along with what Laura's half of the portfolio funded, we've funded Preventing Conflict, Building Sustainable and Inclusive Peace program, which has some really interesting projects that are bringing through a very big range, a very wide range of disciplines. Through the British Academy, we also funded something which looked at heritage, dignity, and violence, which was a completely different approach, looking from the inside out at conflict. The hub that comes closest to this portfolio is Gender Justice Security Hub at LSC, which covers all kinds of issues around conflict. What else? In the pipeline, still coming through the system, are 2 or 3 things that got picked up in the cluster call, which has quite a lot of conflict sprinkled around other challenges. And the last of all that came through the door, which ended last week, was the conflict intersections call, which was our first attempt to kind of bring conflict as a context to intersecting challenges across the SDG spectrum and across the Gcrf spectrum. We received quite an overwhelming response to that call, and it ran quite well. We will still have to go through a panel to figure out who's getting the award. But the conflict intersection kind of elaborated to us a very interesting way in which we have to see conflict as a setting, or conflict as a setting against which other challenges are performed. And lastly, COVID-19 has exacerbated many conflicts within the portfolio, making some projects harder to implement and some projects really hard to deliver right now. It has tripped up ceasefire violations across 35% of the conflicts around the world. It has also made fragile spaces even more fragile. Some of these spaces which are active conflict and extremely poor are some of the worst, with the worst health indicators in place. So access to anything that can be seen as health, water, food, education all starts to break down when COVID-19 is just kind of intersecting across conflict. So it's a portfolio that will grow if we have Gcrf too, but that's a bigger question. Thank you.
So just, I think Neelam's given a great overview of our portfolio area. Just to say, on the displacement side of things, we've had a few major calls recently. We launched a call on protracted displacement, which was looking at the phenomenon of protracted displacement, but trying to do so through an interdisciplinary angle. So the successful grants had to appeal to at least 2 of the other kind of sectoral areas, so health and education, or shelter and health, or nutrition, or whatever it was, trying to have a kind of more holistic approach to thinking about protracted displacement as a development challenge rather than as a short-term humanitarian challenge. And those grants are just starting off now. And we also did, for the first time, a linkage with DFID on humanitarian protection, which really thought about and tried to pick apart different aspects, different approaches to thinking about humanitarian protection, either from a sort of aid angle or from a community angle. And there are 13 grants and 3 Network Plus grants that are just starting up right now. So we're working closely. It's been co-funded by GCRF and by DFID. So there's maybe another kind of advertisement to say something that's coming up is that we've been working closely with the Imperial War Museum over the last 18 months, who are about to launch a major exhibition called Forced to Flee, which looks at 100 years of refugee movements throughout the world. And the exhibition should have opened in April, but of course, because of COVID, it didn't. But they're looking to hopefully open by September or so, and it will be a 6-month exhibition. Several of the GCRF and other UKRI research projects that deal with refugees are featured in that exhibition, and there'll be some GCRF activities that are jointly put together with the museum during the course of that 6 months. So if you're interested in that, then get in touch and I can give you some more information. And that's maybe a place to say something about what is the point of these challenge leaders. In addition to kind of helping to frame calls and be sort of free labor to think about making decisions on calls, we're also trying to help the grantees to think about themselves as members of a community that can come together, and when they come together, their potential impact and their potential sort of strength of their message is stronger than if they were to work individually as unitary projects. So if we take a whole portfolio on protracted displacement, for instance, and they have a similar kind of message, or several of them have a similar kind of message, our feeling is that they can have a stronger impact by delivering that message together, and that we can sometimes as challenge leaders help to open doors so that they have a better platform to be able to do that than if they were working in isolation. So that's why we have these 6 areas. The other thing to say, I think, about challenge leaders is that, and challenge areas is that, although we think about these portfolios, you can see from what the different challenge leaders have said, that we're also very much interested in how they intersect with each other and how there are ways in which we can think about, for instance, displacement in cities, or mobility more broadly, or resilience and health systems. How can those things come together in really strong and effective ways? And how can we get members of our, what might be otherwise a more stovepiped kind of community, to get them speaking to each other? And so that's hopefully what we've been able to start to achieve over the last 2 years that we've been working together on this. At this point, I would really like to throw open the floor and ask if there are questions, or if there are challenges or ideas that relate to any of the things we've been talking about that people want to raise now. This would be a great time to do that. I'll give a few seconds or for people to try to think about what their questions might be. Meanwhile, I don't know whether if I can ask again for anyone who is now involved with GCRF funding, who wants to share their own experience, that would be really welcome. It is hard to do this roundtable when we're all looking at a screen, but hopefully if we think creatively, we can try to find ways of doing that. Or any of the challenge leaders, do you want to say anything else about anything that's been said today? We've got one raised hand here. That's Helen, Jane. Now we've got many.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to pick up on one of the comments from earlier on around the capacity building, and how GCRF funding might pull researchers away from their institutes in low and middle income countries to work on projects against other agendas. And I think there has been a review of research capacity building in the UK with the funds, not just from UK, but also from DFID and Department of Health, and the Wellcome Trust actually has looked as well. And what we've all recognised is that you can't just fund individual researchers. You need to fund systems. There's no point funding a researcher and training them if there is no job for them to go to, or no government that is able to listen to the research that they're working on. So we are looking at how we can strengthen whole research systems rather than just training individual researchers, as a more sustainable way of delivering development, and not having that negative impact of a brain drain, be that a brain drain from one country to another, or from one type of institution to another. And I think we have partnered with the African Research Universities Alliance, RUA, where we are actually helping them to strengthen their own research institutes, and then act as hubs to reach out to the research institutes in their regions to try and strengthen the system as a whole, and to sort of attract researchers and provide an enabling environment for research, so that we're not just constantly pulling researchers away. So it is something that we are aware of, and that we are sort of continually working, if you like, to try and resolve. And and it's important to flag these problems, because of course if you have a large fund, then you may have negative impacts as well as positive impacts, and you need to understand the negative impacts and then take the next step to mitigate that, and also try and predict and offset things as you can. So yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that comment.
Great. Yeah, Helen, maybe while you're there, there's two somewhat related questions. So one is about the question that Julian was trying to ask was about whether there are any comments on the success of the GCRF hubs as modalities of funding in terms of building interdisciplinarity and impact. And do you think that in the future there might be more hubs or more projects or better networks? That's the first question, and then there's another one that I'll come back to.
Yeah, and it's very early days into the hubs. They've been going for just over 12 months. The early indications from the reviews that we've done with them is that we're seeing a lot of potential for driving change and for impact. And I think looking at COVID-19, for example, and the fact that the hubs had flexible funds within them to enable them to respond quickly to COVID-19, those hubs which were working in relevant spaces and actually able the local communities to respond, were able to do really quickly. And so I think there's a lot of positives that have come out of that hub model, but it's very early days. And
oh, we can't hear you now.
Learning.
Somehow your sound just went out just at the last 10 seconds of that, Helen.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah, we just lost the last 10 seconds.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, I was just finishing off by saying it's still early days for the hubs, and we still have to, monitor and evaluate, and they're being very closely monitored, and the evaluation is very intense, but the early signs are looking positive. So, yeah.
Okay. Great. Another question from Severine was about, given the decolonizing the curriculum movement and Roads Must Fall, what's the current thinking within GCRF in terms of decolonization?
Yeah.
I'd like to say something about that too, but why don't you go ahead first, Helen?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and it's a question that we should ask ourselves, and we should continue to ask ourselves. And I think Laura said something about this at the beginning, that if you look at where the research councils were 5 years ago when this fund started, And if you look at where the research councils are now, they're in a very different place. So, for example, 5 years ago, there was only one research council who had given funding directly to researchers in low and middle income countries. And there were many research councils who'd never even had low and middle income country researchers as co-investigators, let alone PIs on their project. So, you know, we have worked, you know, come a long way compared to where we were. But it's still, I would say, you know, very much the beginning of the process. And, you know, but we have committed to equitable partnership. We have committed to the fundamental principles, if you like, of decolonizing, you know, development. And we just, but it's a journey. And, you know, and it's a journey that we have to go to. We have to bring the research councils along with us. We have to bring government departments along with us. We have to bring, you know, the UK higher education sector along with us. But we are committed on that path, and we'll do what we can. And certainly going forward in GCRF2, it would have to be something that is in the forefront of our minds.
Yeah. Andrea Rigon also asked about whether there are ways in which we could feed back. And I would just say, I think, you know, all of us are really committed to this. And so if you want to reach out to any of us as challenge leaders or to Helen, we'll share those messages back and feed into it as part of the discussion about how to strengthen research partnerships, how to strengthen what we do on the ground in terms of our international research collaborations. It's a thread that runs through all of the work that we do. As there's also, I don't know if people have seen that there was last year a research exercise sort of brokered by UK Collaborative for Development Research, UK CDR, which looked at the quality and the challenges of international research partnerships. That should be available on the UKRI website. And if people can't find it, you can get in touch and I can send you the link. And also, I was involved in the migration work with the migration leadership team at the London International Development Centre. And we were looking at the migration studies landscape, and a major thrust of that 2-year process of trying to understand what the challenges and opportunities were within that space was to look at the kinds of experiences that our international collaborators have. So we recently put out a strategy paper which looks at various things, impact, research partnerships and themes for research. But that question of partnerships is a major feature. So again, if you want to just search for the LIDC Migration Leadership Team, and you'll find that strategy paper, which may be helpful as well to see sort of where we're going. So we presented that to AHRC and ESRC, who paid for the research. Another question is around COVID-19, which from Hadarika, which is, has COVID-19, especially how it's limited our ability to travel and access different communities and push towards explorations? I guess this question is, how has it limited our ability to travel, access communities, and push towards explorations of newish research methodologies? So has it led to some new kind of thinking about research? We can say something, maybe just in the interest of trying to get as many questions in as possible, I can also respond to that, which is to say that that's been a major challenge with the agility grants that we have right now on COVID-19, which, you know, obviously we're in the process of commissioning quite a large number of research projects, hopefully. And we're in a situation in which virtually no face-to-face research can be done, or at least in a lot of contexts it can't be done. And so it's been quite interesting to look at some of the applications that have come in, to look at some of the creative ways in which people are trying to get around or to think about using new kinds of methodologies, new platforms, building on existing networks, other kinds of things to carry out research that's not in a sort of more traditional face-to-face setting. I think it's still early days, and it will be really interesting to know, you know, at the end of, for instance, this round of agility grants, when we look at what have we learned about COVID and its impact and how to mitigate its impact, I think there'll be another set of questions around what have we learned about these remote technologies and methodologies, and is there something to say more broadly around methodology that comes out of those? I don't know if any of the other challenge leaders want to say anything about that kind of research as well. Feel free. There was a few minutes ago. Oh, go ahead, Helen Lambert. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge question for pretty much all of the Gcrf awards. Of course, by definition, we're working in settings in which suddenly fieldwork's very restricted, if not actually impossible to do, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty about when it will be able to resume. Certainly in terms of the partnerships that I have and other people I've been working with, what's been cheering, I think, is the way in which people have not only been attempting to be quite innovative in terms of thinking about, albeit potentially compromised methodologies for data collection, trying to make contact with people remotely and that kind of thing, but also responding quite actively to the crisis in which we find ourselves. Obviously, there are mechanisms for repurposing grants and that kind of thing. But as a social scientist, coming from a background, I'm an anthropologist by background, in which we're really not very good at rapid research. We kind of tend to need a year or two of field work before we. There's been an enormous enthusiasm and has almost forced people to collaborate and reach out to each other and say, oh, how can we do this? So I don't know whether, we'll wait and see how that pans out. But in a way, in being put up against public health, epidemiology, people who traditionally have a much more quick to the party in terms of getting out there and getting some data and doing something. I think it's in a way been a constructive challenge to force those in terms of that interdisciplinarity to kind of make it come together in a rapid way, because everyone feels a sort of moral obligation to both work with the communities who are most badly affected and also to potentially influence policy, knowing what's going on the ground, to find some way of feeding that through.
Great, thanks, Helen. Jaideep, I think you wanted to come in here as well.
Thanks, Laura. Just to echo what others have said on this point as well, but just to nuance that while the new and innovative research methodologies have been, as Helen said, quite cheering to see that the communities have come together in this time to think about not just implications of COVID directly to research processes and the broader sort of environment in which those research projects are occurring, but also the sort of wider conceptual shifts that need to occur in response to the pandemic. But critically, these new methodologies that have been employed or are being employed have, for obvious reasons, had to rely on digital and communications technologies and infrastructures in a particular way. And that, of course, only amplifies pre-existing inequalities and sort of highlights perhaps new neglected geographies, which were sort of originally just about reachable, just about accessible. But now, with the issues around broadband, simply fall off research radars because of inaccess. And so we do need to think carefully in the medium to long term, just to revisit what hasn't happened or what we haven't been able to do as researchers. I was having a conversation this morning reflecting with researchers about how a key method was for urban scholars to loiter in the hallways of municipal offices, right? To find time with the right urban local authorities, to get their views on particular aspects, to connect with them. That simply hasn't been possible. It's almost impossible now to reach the types of stakeholders we were just by physically being present in those spaces. And equally, those burdens fall on our local partners as well. They haven't been able to make those links either. So that's quite interesting to think about. Another risk is, of course, alongside all of the interesting work our researchers and engaged communities are doing on COVID, there is a significant risk to non-COVID related research of just being drowned out at the moment. And perhaps it is time at the moment to focus on the pandemic, its direct and indirect and secondary implications, but there's ongoing research that's not connected to the pandemic. And so that risk is also significant in the communities and worth taking note of, and indeed feeding back. If you are one of the 30 odd people in this call that is doing research that's not related to COVID, but is feeling like you don't have space to amplify your research findings, then get in touch, and equally spread the word that other research continues.
Those are really important points. I think, also as we think about our ability to use these kinds of technologies, as clunky as this roundtable may be today, we've also found that in a lot of the challenge leaders work that we've been doing, where we've had to move all of our activities online, that in some ways it's allowed us to widen our net and to involve a much greater, more international, more early career, more participatory approach generally. By, if we're having a webinar, it means we're not talking about flying one person per project into an event. Anybody who's involved in the project can take part. And so in some ways, we've sort of inadvertently had a real widening, which has been a sort of silver lining to the difficulties that this pandemic has presented us with. I think it's also it's important that UKRI, GCRF learn from these experiences as well and try. I would have my feeling has been we've been a little bit old-fashioned in terms of our outreach and sort of having live events in physical spaces where people needed to be physically present in order to gather information or to understand how to go about applying or something. And there's a need to really be up our game and be a lot more accessible virtually for people who are not able to travel. And that widens our whole outreach in really ways already that we can already see, but I think that will just expand and expand as we go forward. Don't know whether there was Jamie Cross was in the queue for a minute and then disappeared. I don't know if it's still there, Jamie, but if you want to ask a question now, you feel free. Or if anyone else has anything that they want to mention, feel free. Or if not, we can leave it. We can end a few minutes early if people like. Usually when I say that, lots of people jump on. But we haven't said much, although we know we've sort of made passing reference to the announcement today about the Foreign Office and DFID merging. It will be interesting to see then what, no one's asked a question about whether or not UK development priorities will be changing. I think that GCRF priorities are somehow a little bit insulated from having to be completely responsive to that process. But of course, as the landscape changes, there will be some interesting discussions to be had for sure, I think. Neelam has a question here very early on, the question about what the future research priorities could be and should be. And that's something that we posed to the group here. If people have suggestions about what you think future research priorities could or should be, either in any of these challenge areas or more broadly, this would be a good time to mention any of them. I think then if people don't have more questions that they want to ask or points that they want to make, that's absolutely fine. I was going to ask Jaideep if you could just kind of finish us up by giving some reflections on some of the things we've been talking about today.
Sure, Laura. And I think we were meant to go only to 5:30, so we may have run a couple of minutes over. And in this new world of webinars, people tend to leave on the dot and start on the dot, which is something new for at least for me as an academic to get used to. Very, very quickly and briefly, I think to reflect on this discussion, which has been fruitful and granted, having these in person is always so much better and so much more fruitful. But please do continue to raise the points that you have and you would like to. And thank you for joining. Just two quick reflections. One around this question of research continuity. And it was really interesting that this discussion nuanced that and complexified research complexity, research continuity in ways that we've been discussing amongst the challenge leads, Laura, and indeed wider across UKRI, because it has implications as we move from GCRF 1 to 2, as we deal with the pandemic, as we deal with the potentially shrinking aid budget. All kinds of fluidity that Helen Fletcher was mentioning in the beginning. It has implications on the types of partnerships we've invested in. It has implications on the structural changes that UK higher education institutions have made to respond to grant challenges. And equally, as we pointed out, there have been some very prominent, significant, and indeed potentially permanent changes that have also been undertaken by our partners across the developing country context. And so those need to be taken into note of. And of course, this has an implication or interdisciplinarity as well, not just in terms of methods, but also in impacts and the types of impacts that have been envisaged. So it'd be quite important to take note of that from GCRF 1 as we move to GCRF 2, but equally position these in a much wider and longer trajectory of development research. And here certainly this merger of FCO and DFID will have an implication in how we move forward. And it is potentially incumbent on our research communities to make sure the evidence from what we've learned over the years, over the decades of engaged development research, to bring that to bear at this moment of change. And the second point, very quickly, was this weighing up between the global policy agendas, like the SDGs, what they mean in this new post-COVID context, and weighing those up with local priorities. The extent to which local or indeed hyper-local, right, city to neighborhood to even more local to the individual and indeed to the molecular level has some implications, and what this means to addressing the grand challenges in the narrative of global risks, in the terms of lived realities of the most marginalized, least resourced people. So it's actually quite a wide-ranging discussion. It would have been great to delve into it a lot further. But I hope those two overarching points do justice to the conversation that we have had, and the points that people were hoping to raise through the chat in this environment. And to also thank DSA, I suppose, for investing in this incredible online environment. Each one of these environments amazes me at how by the end of it, I pick up, and it's actually quite intuitive now. So I hope others have had a reasonably good experience, and thank you to the DSA for supporting this event. Laura, back to you.
Great. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Shadip. I just put there's a challengeleaders@ukri.org email address. If you want to follow up with us on any of these things, give us any more feedback, or ask, or indeed think of a question that you didn't get a chance to ask, please do feel free. We'll get back to you. That email goes to all of us. So I think it's just it's really helpful for us particularly at this moment when we're sort of in this interstitial space between GCRF 1 and 2, to listen and to talk to as many people as possible. And we've been doing that in a number of different fora. So I hope that we can keep the conversation going, and that we'll find each other in other virtual or real environments.
Hopefully real very soon.
Yeah, hopefully real. We're all getting a little tired of being locked inside. Anyway, enjoy the conference. I hope to see some of you tomorrow. To give a plug, one of the GCRF hubs on South-South migration on inequalities in migration. We'll be hosting a three-part session on mobility and inequalities tomorrow and Thursday morning. So hope to see some of you there. And otherwise, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Laura, do you end the broadcast? Do I end the broadcast?
I guess I can do it. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.